Today, we're diving deep into the mind of one of history's most fascinating thinkers, the 11th century philosopher Al-Ghazali. And we're looking at a huge paradox he faced. How could he publicly slam certain mystical ideas as total heresy, but then behind the scenes explore those very same ideas with real intellectual curiosity? Let's get into it.
So what's this all about? It really boils down to one single, kind of explosive question. Can a human being actually unite with God? This was the big question that mystics were grappling with and that theologians like Al-Ghazali had to answer with, extreme care. Okay, so to unravel this whole puzzle, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the deviant idea that he publicly shot down. Then, we're going to uncover his really surprising distinction. After that, we'll break down the huge difference between a literal and a metaphorical interpretation, explore what annihilation of self really means, and finally, see how this all circles back to protecting the core idea of God's oneness.
All right, so let's start with Al-Ghazali's official public position, because on the surface, it seems pretty black and white.
The whole controversy really centers on two big mystical concepts. First, you've got Hulul, which is the idea of God kind of dwelling inside a person. And then there's Ittihad, which is the complete union of that person with God. You can almost think of it as a progression. First, God is within you, and that eventually leads to you becoming one with God.
And Al-Ghazali's public ruling on this? It was harsh. I mean, in his famous autobiography, he just flat out condemns these ideas as sasat, which is a really strong word. It means deviant, misguided, heretical. So case closed, right? Well, not quite.
Because this is where things get really interesting. It turns out Al-Ghazali was way more nuanced than his public statements made him seem. You see, in some of his other, more specialized works, he doesn't just dismiss these ideas. Not at all. He actually analyzes them. He explores what they could mean, and he treats them with this surprising level of objectivity. So what's going on here? Why would a thinker of his caliber condemn an idea in one book and then seriously dissect it in another? The answer to this paradox is just classic Al-Ghazali. It's all about making this one brilliant, crucial distinction. He basically argued that the problem wasn't the experience the mystics were having, it was the language they were using to talk about it. So he split the whole idea into two different ways you could understand it, literally or metaphorically.
And this right here, this is the absolute heart of his argument. So let's break down these two totally opposite ways of looking at this idea of indwelling, or hulul.
First up, you have what he called hulul hakiki. That's literal indwelling. This is the belief that God's actual divine essence literally fuses with a physical person, like a piece of God's substance could actually merge with a human being. For Al-Ghazali, this was an absolute non-starter, total heresy, end of story. But then you've got the other option, hulul majazi, or metaphorical indwelling. Now this has nothing to do with a physical merger. This is all about a psychological, a spiritual experience. It's describing a state where the mystic's own sense of self, their ego, their consciousness, it just completely vanishes. And all that's left in their awareness is the overwhelming presence of God's power. And this just lays it out so clearly. On the left, you have the heretical view. The person's consciousness becomes God's. It's like two things merging into one. But look at the right. This is the acceptable view. The person's consciousness vanishes. It's gone. It's not a merger, it's an erasure. It's not two becoming one, it's one disappearing, leaving only the one. That distinction, that's everything.
So you might be thinking this metaphorical indwelling is just some clever philosophical wordplay, but for Al-Ghazali, it was way more than that. He was using it to explain a very real and very profound mystical state. He connects this experience directly to fana, which is a huge concept in Sufism that means the annihilation or the dissolving of the self. It's that moment where the ego just melts away and the mystic feels completely absorbed in the divine. Al-Ghazali is basically saying, look, this experience is real, it's valid, but we have got to be incredibly precise about how we describe it.
He even lays out the psychological trap, the slippery slope of how a totally sincere mystic can fall into heresy. Step 1, they witness God's absolute power in everything around them. Step 2, this is so overwhelming that they completely forget their own self, their own power. And then, here's the fatal misstep, step 3. In that state of self-forgetting, they might wrongly claim God's power as their own. They feel this incredible force and think, I am God, when Al-Ghazali would correct them and say, no, you are nothing, and God is everything.
And this brings us to the final and, honestly, the most important piece of this whole puzzle. Why? Why did Al-Ghazali go to such lengths to make this distinction? Well, it all comes down to protecting the single most important principle in Islam.
And that principle is Tawheed. Tawheed is the absolute, non-negotiable belief in the oneness of God. It means God is unique, indivisible, and completely beyond our world. Nothing in creation can be compared to him, can merge with him, or can become a part of him. This is the absolute bedrock of Islamic theology. So now you can see how this all connects back, right? The literal view, hakiki, completely shatters Tawheed. It suggests God's essence can be broken up and stuck inside a person, which is a theological impossibility. But the metaphorical view, majazi, that actually reinforces Tawheed. The annihilation of the self is the ultimate proof that there is no power, no reality, except for the one God.
So at the end of the day, Al-Ghazali's verdict is crystal clear. He gives a hard no to the literal union of a human essence with God's, but a profound yes to the mystical experience of the ego just vanishing before God. He wasn't anti-mysticism, he was a master theologian protecting its very core.
So ultimately, by rejecting the literal indwelling of God, he also has to reject the idea of a true union, or ittihad. But in doing that, he gives a solid theological foundation to that powerful, transformative experience of fana, that beautiful vanishing of the self in the presence of the Absolute One.
And what Al-Ghazali leaves us with is a challenge that's still so relevant today, far beyond just theology. In any profound experience of losing yourself, whether it's spiritual, or through arts, or even in nature, where do you draw the line between a humble recognition of something greater and the delusion that you, yourself, have become that greater thing?